We're going to kick it off with news that a study out of the University of Otago has found international doctors that fill critical roles. Many are struggling with cross-cultural code switching. First time I'd ever heard of that. Code switching is when people consciously change their normal way of doing things from their native culture to match cultural expectations. This study says that some doctors were left stressed, feeling like an imposter and socially isolated as they struggle to come to grips with our way of life. Goodness, is it that hard? This included the dual demands of Māori and non-Māori cultures. So, what is this all about? Well, it's good to have on the show. He's a friend, Dr. Bryan Betty. Hello, Bryan.
Oh, hi, Leah. Nice to be here.
And nice to talk to you again. I had never heard of this cross-culture code switching, but basically, if I've got it right, it's culture shock that could be pushing international doctors away. Is this something you're familiar with?
Look, I think it's something that's bobbed around in the background, and this report's probably brought it to the fore. You know, New Zealand has a very distinct culture, a very distinct cultural makeup. In terms of medicine itself, we practice in a very patient-centred way in New Zealand, in a very good way, and there's a couple of things that start to go on there. But coming from a completely different culture, and we're very reliant on overseas trained doctors. About 40% of our medical workforce is overseas trained, so we have a high throughput of doctors into the country. So it sort of doesn't surprise me that there is this issue that's sort of showing up of people coming here and, you know, a bit of a culture shock in terms of the way we operate here from what they may have been used to in their countries. So yeah, look, it just does, I think, just flag this issue as something we need to be aware of if we are very reliant on overseas trained doctors.
Well, it went on to say that there could be a clash of communication styles, which I think you've just kind of reiterated, between some of the doctors and the less direct Kiwi style. What does that mean? What's our less direct Kiwi style?
Well, look. I think to be fair to our medical system, we've actually got a very good medical system. We know it's under pressure. We know there's financial issues, we know there's capacity issues, we know there's workforce issues, and we talk a lot about that, and you know, it is a reality. However, I think we do have a very good system, and look, we are very patient-centred. So in terms of the way we learn to practice medicine in New Zealand, the way we're taught at medical school and the way the colleges then develop and want us to do, we want us to be very patient-centric so the patient gets the best outcome from treatment or interaction with the medical profession. That's become very pronounced in the last 10 to 20 years. Culturally, we need to be aware of Māori culture and need and be culturally very aware of that because it's a very important part of who New Zealand is. But if you come from a culture that may be more hierarchical, more traditional, and we know a lot of medical systems around the world are like that, where the doctor is the person of authority, then stepping into the New Zealand environment is quite a transition. And yes, we have seen issues where that can cause problems in terms of miscommunication, perhaps behavioural perceptions and things that occur. And I think I go back to this point, we just need to be aware that this is an issue and we need to try and mitigate that, especially if we are so reliant on the overseas trained medical workforce.
I found you've mentioned it a few times about, you know, Māori culture, because responses from the doctors ranged in this study from being personally conflicted about karakia to others learning te reo Māori phrases and using them on patients. They said many felt awkward when using the language. They were worried whether they were going to be seen as genuine. So I can imagine why. But I think when you go to the doctor, to me, this is the way I look at it, that it doesn't matter that I'm part Māori or not, or you aren't, or I'm Asian, or I'm... the doctor is there to help you. I don't think he's there to greet me in te reo. I don't think that's important and I just think if we're heaping this onto them, I mean, when we look at it, 30% of Kiwis are able to speak a few Māori words, you know, the kia ora, ngā mihis. 9% can speak it fairly well, but only 3% are fluent. So why would we heap all of this onto our international doctors?
Look, I don't necessarily think that's what's happening. I approach it like this. Any patient who walks in to see me from whatever culture, you just need to respect who they are, the context, whānau, family, and where they come from. And you do adapt what you do to the person in front of you, because, again, practicing medicine is all about relationship, it's all about communication, and it's all about trust. So being aware of some of the cultural norms, I suppose, for want of a better word, I think is really, really important. I think the issue here is not the fact it happens. I think the issue is here we need to be aware of it, and we need to be providing support to understand this aspect of what does go on in medicine in New Zealand and how we approach it, and make sure that we are lessening the impact if someone is struggling. And I would argue it's a minority of overseas trained doctors that do struggle with this, which is fine. But we need to mitigate and make sure that doesn't become an issue, and we don't get an overseas reputation for being a difficult place to come to.
Yes.
That we are supporting our new doctors into culture. It'd be like, a New Zealand graduate, I don't know, going to Africa. There's cultural norms there. It can be a cultural shock. I've been to Zambia. I've sort of looked at the medical system there, and it's very, very different to here, and you need to adjust to that. But it's the support we provide, which I think is the critical thing here.
We've got a lot here, Dr. Betty. Yes, let's move on to the impending strike by junior doctors. About, I believe, 2,500 resident doctors working for Te Whatu Ora have issued a strike notice. 25 hours from 7 a.m. on the 7th of May, and further strike action is also being considered. Is this again about current pay? Is it conditions? I mean, those are normally the two we go for, isn't it?
Conditions and pay are obviously the two things that sit here. We have to acknowledge we've got a pretty stretched hospital sector. There are a lot of demands that are placed on junior doctors, registrars in terms of workloads and what's actually happening. And obviously there's an issue that's arisen in the negotiations, and this is a result. I hope we don't go on strike. I hope they don't go on strike, I should say. I think it puts tremendous additional pressure on the system, pressure on patients, their colleagues, and certainly puts a lot of pressure on general practice, where I sit in terms of what I do within general practice. So look, if it can be avoided, it should be, but I think it's a reflection of the pressure the system's under at the moment. We know there's these problems all over the place at the moment, both in the community and the hospital sector, and it is something, the government is going to have to look at and address, because we need a robust, healthy sort of health system going forward, and we've got to start to alleviate some of the problems that arise.
Well, speaking of those pressures, Bryan, you've led me nicely to the last story that I saw, was that more adults are arriving at the doorstep of an already under pressure ED. These figures, get this, figures for the year ending July 2023 showed 752,000 adults visited the emergency department at least once during the year. This is the highest annual surveyed figure in more than a decade. Why? I'm sure there's probably more than one reason. Why are we flocking to ED?